You didn't do anything that deserves being rewarded, so no, you can't have one. My throat tightened, and I just nodded like the word hadn't landed right on the softest part of me. The espresso smell was thick in the air, sweet and burned at the same time, and the glass case of pastries reflected the harsh overhead lights like a little stage where everyone could see you too clearly. We were standing at the end of the counter at Starbucks, waiting for the barista to call the name on the cup. Her daughter was bouncing on her toes, already smiling at the idea of sugar, already acting like the world was obligated to celebrate her for existing. And I, 58 years old, standing there with my hands folded like I was asking permission to breathe, had just been told, out loud, that I didn't deserve a drink. I kept my face still. That's what I've always done. I've learned how to make my pain quiet. The girlfriend, Kara, didn't even look embarrassed. She said it the way you say something obvious, something you think everyone should agree with. Her voice stayed light, almost cheerful, like she was teaching a child a lesson about fairness. Her daughter, Lily, tilted her head at me with that quick little smirk kids get when they notice an adult has just been put in their place. 13 years old and already practiced at it. A barista slid 2 cake pops into a little white bag and set it on the counter. Kara reached for it immediately, fingers confident, nails polished. Then she took the cup with the green straw, the one topped with whipped cream and caramel drizzle, and handed it to Lily like it was a crown. "Here you go, baby," she said, soft as honey. I watched Lily wrap both hands around the cup, like it was precious, like it was a trophy she'd earned with blood instead of a math quiz. She took a long sip and made a satisfied sound that didn't belong in my ears. I had asked, politely. I'd kept it simple. Could I get something too? I'd said, already feeling strange for even speaking. Kara had patted her purse as if she'd just remembered she was human. "Oh, shoot, I'm out of money," she'd said, smiling like it was a harmless accident. "Next time, okay?" Next time. The words had that familiar sting, the kind that's always wrapped in a smile, the kind people use when they're deciding who counts. I knew my brother, Mark, had given her money for the day. He'd said it right in front of me before we left the house, trying too hard to sound cheerful. "Take the girls out," he'd told her, handing over cash like it was a peace offering. "Get them something nice, make it a fun day." He'd said, "the girls," like I belonged in that sentence, like I was going to be included instead of tolerated. I had forced myself to go because Mark wanted it. My brother has always had that pleading look when he thinks he's failing at something, and lately, he's been living in that look. His ex-wife was overseas dealing with a sick relative, and the house had been crowded with new personalities and silent competition. He wanted things smooth. He wanted forced bonding to do what time and respect were supposed to do naturally. So I went. I spent hours walking behind them through the mall like a quiet shadow, store after store where Lily squealed over glossy bags and sparkly palettes. Kara kept saying, "Yes, baby," with the warmth people usually reserve for someone they actually see. And every time we passed something I might have liked, nothing big, just a scarf, a pair of earrings, a bookstore, I watched Kara's eyes slide right over me like I was part of the wall. I told myself not to be petty. I told myself I was a grown woman. I told myself the day wasn't about me. But standing in that Starbucks, with the fluorescent lights exposing every line in my hands and every ache in my chest, I realized it wasn't just about coffee. It was about the way Kara decided who was worthy of small kindnesses and how easily she made it sound like a moral lesson. "You can't take one of her cake pops," she'd said when I'd tried, quietly, to soften the sting. "It's her treat. She worked hard. It would be wrong." Wrong. I looked at the tiny bag on the counter, the 2 cake pops inside like they were sacred. I looked at Lily's lips, already sticky, already satisfied, and I heard Kara's earlier words again, clear and clean like she'd meant them to stay with me. "You didn't do anything that deserves being rewarded." My fingers curled around the strap of my purse so hard it pressed into my skin. I didn't want to argue. I didn't want to give her the satisfaction of watching me beg, and I didn't want to be reduced to fighting over sugar like my dignity cost $6.45s. So I did what I've done 1,000 times in my life when someone tries to make me smaller. I swallowed it. Kara turned her body slightly away from me, already finished with the conversation. Her shoulders were relaxed, her expression calm, like she'd just corrected a minor inconvenience. The barista called out the name on the cup. Kara stepped forward, grabbed the second drink, and handed it to herself without hesitation. 2 drinks, 2 cake pops, and me standing there empty-handed, expected to be grateful I'd been invited to watch. Lily laughed softly at something on her phone, and Kara leaned in, smiling, mother and daughter pressed together in their own little bubble. I stood a half step behind them, feeling the space I took up in that line like something shameful. Then my phone vibrated in my coat pocket. I pulled it out and saw Mark's name on the screen, a simple message lighting up the glass like a spotlight. "Hey, did you get yourself something too?" I stared at my phone for a second longer than necessary before sliding it back into my pocket without answering. Kara didn't notice. Or maybe she did and chose not to. She was already walking toward the exit, one arm draped casually around Lily's shoulders, guiding her through the crowd like the mall parted naturally for them. I followed a step behind, the automatic doors hissing open and shut with a sound that felt too sharp for how quiet I was inside. Outside, the afternoon light was bright and flat, bouncing off car windshields and the pale concrete of the parking lot. It made everything feel exposed. I pulled my cardigan tighter around myself, even though it wasn't cold. Kara unlocked the car, and Lily climbed into the front passenger seat without asking. I paused for half a beat, then went around to the back like I already knew my place. The door shut with a dull thud that seemed louder than it should have been. As Kara pulled out of the parking spot, Lily turned her drink in the cup holder, shaking the ice so it rattled. She licked whipped cream off the lid and laughed. "This is so good," she said, stretching the words. "Mom, can we come back here tomorrow?" Kara smiled at her through the rearview mirror. "We'll see, honey. You earned today." Earned. The word slipped into the space between my ribs and stayed there. I watched the road slide past through the side window, storefronts blurring into colors that didn't mean anything. No one spoke to me, not even to fill the silence. Kara turned up the radio just enough to make conversation unnecessary, humming softly along to a song she clearly liked. My phone buzzed again. Mark. This time I answered. "Hey," I said, keeping my voice even. "Did you guys have fun?" he asked. I could hear the hope in it, thin and careful, like he was testing a cracked surface. "Sure," I said. There was a pause. Then, "I thought I saw 2 drinks when you came in on the camera earlier." I glanced at the rearview mirror. Kara's eyes flicked toward me for half a second, then back to the road. "Oh," I said. "Yeah, they stopped for Starbucks." "And you?" he asked. The car seemed to get quieter, the radio suddenly too loud and too far away at the same time. Lily leaned back in her seat, listening now, pretending not to. "I didn't get one," I said. "Why not?" Mark asked. I could have softened it. I could have made it small. I could have said it didn't matter. But the words Kara had used came back clean and exact, like they'd been carved instead of spoken. She said I didn't do anything that deserved being rewarded. The line went silent. Kara's grip on the steering wheel tightened just enough to notice. Her jaw set, a subtle shift that said she'd heard every word. "That's not what I said," she cut in sharply, not even waiting for Mark to respond. Her voice was tight now, defensive, stripped of its earlier sweetness. "You're twisting it." Mark exhaled slowly. "Kara." "She asked at the last minute," Kara continued, her tone climbing just enough to sound reasonable instead of angry. "I told her I didn't have money left, that's it." "That's not—" I started, then stopped myself. I stared at my hands instead, folded neatly in my lap. Lily turned around in her seat and looked at me, eyes narrowed. "You're just jealous," she said flatly. "You didn't even do anything." Kara didn't correct her. Mark's voice came through the phone, strained now. "Lily, that's enough." "She started it," Lily shot back. "She always acts like she deserves stuff." I felt heat rise in my chest, sharp and fast. Kara let out a small laugh, the kind that pretends to be embarrassed, but isn't. "She's just a kid," Kara said lightly, like that settled it. "And honestly, this feels a little greedy." Greedy. The word landed harder than the rest. I said nothing. I pressed my lips together and focused on breathing through my nose, slow and quiet. My hands were trembling just slightly, like they were cold. Mark didn't say anything for a moment. Then, "We'll talk about this at home." Kara scoffed under her breath. "Fine." The rest of the drive passed in brittle silence. The radio stayed on, but no one sang anymore. Lily slurped the last of her drink loudly, then crumpled the cup and tossed it into the backseat floor without looking. When we pulled into the driveway, the house looked the same as it always did, neutral, calm, pretending nothing inside it could hurt you. Kara parked and got out without waiting, already ushering Lily toward the door. Mark was standing in the entryway when we came in. He glanced at the drinks in their hands, then at me, empty-handed. His mouth tightened. "What happened?" he asked. Before I could answer, Kara stepped forward. "Nothing happened," she said quickly. "She made it a thing." I opened my mouth, then closed it again. I watched Mark's eyes flick between us, searching for balance, for a version of the story that didn't require him to pick a side. Lily rolled her eyes. "She's just mad I got rewarded." Mark rubbed his forehead. "Kara, come on." Kara crossed her arms. "I'm not going to apologize for teaching my daughter about earning things." Something inside me shifted, slow and uncomfortable. Not anger yet, something closer to clarity. "I didn't ask for a lecture," I said quietly. "I asked for a drink." Kara's eyes flashed, and I said, "Next time." Mark looked at me, then at Kara. "There was money," he said carefully. Kara's lips pressed into a thin line. "It was spent." On what, she didn't say. She didn't have to. The room felt smaller, the air heavier. Lily slipped past us and headed down the hall, already done with the conversation. Mark sighed. "Let's just cool off." Kara turned away without another word, her shoulders stiff, retreating into silence like it was armor. I stood there for a moment longer, feeling something tighten behind my eyes. Then my phone buzzed again in my pocket. A notification. Not from Mark this time. From the bank. A charge alert time-stamped earlier that afternoon with Kara's name attached to it. I didn't always know how to disappear the way I do now. There was a time when I took up space without apologizing for it, when my voice came out full instead of measured, when asking for something small didn't feel like confessing a weakness. That version of me feels far away, like a photograph left too long in the sun, still recognizable, but faded at the edges. I grew up in a narrow house that always smelled faintly of iron and soap. My mother scrubbed everything twice, as if cleanliness could keep the world from intruding. My father worked nights at the factory, his boots lined up by the door, their toes dusted white from concrete powder. When he came home in the mornings, the sky was usually pale and undecided, and the kitchen light cast a hard yellow circle over the table. There was a ledger my mother kept in the top drawer, wrapped in a rubber band that had lost its stretch. She wrote in it every evening, slow and precise, the scratch of her pen louder than the radio. Groceries, gas, school shoes, doctor visits. She never explained it to me, but I learned early that every kindness had a cost, and every cost had to be accounted for. That ledger taught me restraint before anyone ever taught me joy. I married young. Not because I was swept away, but because it felt like the next logical step, like something that would steady my footing. My husband wasn't cruel. He was tired. The kind of tired that sinks into your bones and makes ambition feel indulgent. We built a life out of routine. Work, bills, dinners, eaten too late at night. Conversations that stayed on the surface because neither of us had the energy to dive deeper. When my brother Mark had his first child, I became auntie. before I became anything else. I was the reliable one, the one who picked up extra shifts, who showed up early, who remembered birthdays without reminders. When Mark's marriage began to fray, he leaned on me in ways he never named directly. I watched his house when they fought. I took calls late at night when he didn't know what else to do with his fear. I didn't mind, or at least I told myself I didn't. After his divorce, Mark moved closer. He needed help with childcare on weekends, then on weeknights, then sometimes just someone to sit in the same room while he pretended everything was fine. His daughter, Emily, spent more time with me than with either parent for a while. I packed her lunches, helped with homework, learned which shows she liked and which foods she refused to eat, unless they were cut a certain way. I told myself this was what family did. You step in, you fill gaps, you don't keep score. Years pass that way, quietly. My own marriage ended without drama, just a slow unraveling that left behind boxes of shared things and not much else. I moved into a smaller place. I learned how to be alone without calling it loneliness. I took pride in being needed, even when it came at the cost of being seen. When Kara came into Mark's life, she arrived like a burst of color in a room that had been beige for too long. She laughed loudly. She dressed brightly. She spoke with certainty even when she was wrong. She had a daughter of her own, Lily, and she talked about her the way people talk about miracles they expect the world to applaud. At first, I admired her confidence. I admired how easily she took up space. She never asked permission to belong. The first time I noticed something off, it was small enough to dismiss. We were all sitting at Mark's table, eating takeout, and Kara had brought dessert just for Lily, a single cupcake, pink frosting piled high. She handed it to her daughter without comment, then looked surprised when Emily glanced at it. "Oh," Kara had said lightly, "this is just for Lily. She had a big week." Emily nodded, trying to smile. I remember the way her shoulders dipped just slightly, like she'd braced for disappointment without meaning to. I told myself it was nothing. Kids get treats. Adults overthink. But moments like that began to stack quietly, like papers slipped back into a drawer instead of dealt with. Kara praised Lily loudly and often, her affection a constant stream. Emily received polite acknowledgement at best, silence at worst. When Emily achieved something, Kara would say things like, "That's good, but there's always room to improve," or, "You should have seen Lily when she was your age." I watched these interactions from the side, my presence tolerated but unnecessary. I was no longer the center of Emily's small world. I was a background fixture, useful but replaceable. Still, I said nothing. I'd learned long ago that peace is often maintained by the person willing to swallow the most. Money became another quiet marker of difference. Kara spent freely on Lily, new clothes, gadgets, outings. Mark paid for most of it, though the way it happened was subtle enough to avoid confrontation. Kara would mention something Lily needed, her tone casual, and Mark would nod, already reaching for his wallet. Emily learned to ask me for things instead, her voice careful, like she didn't want to impose. I found myself dipping into my savings more often, small amounts at first, a field trip fee, a replacement charger, shoes when Emily outgrew the old ones faster than expected. I told myself it was temporary. I told myself Mark would notice eventually. He didn't, or maybe he did and didn't know how to fix it. The ledger from my childhood resurfaced in my mind more than once during those years. I bought a small notebook, not the same but close, and started jotting things down, not because I planned to confront anyone, but because I needed proof for myself that I wasn't imagining the imbalance. Dates, amounts, what it was for. I kept it tucked away in my desk drawer, the pages filling slowly, the ink steady and calm. There were moments of warmth, too. I won't pretend otherwise. Kara could be charming when she wanted to be. She complimented my cooking once, asked me for a recipe. She invited me to sit with her during a school event, smiled like we were allies. Those moments kept me hopeful longer than they should have. But hope, I've learned, can be as dangerous as resentment if you cling to it too tightly. As Emily grew older, she began to withdraw. She spent more time in her room, less time asking questions. The easy laughter we once shared came less often, replaced by a careful politeness that made my chest ache. I tried to reach her, to bridge the widening space, but she was learning her own lessons about where she stood. One evening, after everyone else had gone to bed, I found myself sitting alone at the kitchen table, the house quiet except for the hum of the refrigerator. I opened my notebook and stared at the numbers, at the evidence of my own quiet contributions. It wasn't anger I felt then, it was grief. Grief for the version of myself who believed being indispensable would protect me. I closed the notebook and slid it back into the drawer. I turned off the light and went to bed, telling myself tomorrow would be different. Tomorrow rarely is. By the time my mother passed, I'd become accustomed to standing slightly apart from my own life. At the funeral, Kara held Lily close, whispering reassurances. Emily stood beside me, her hand brushing mine once before retreating. I squeezed her fingers gently, hoping she felt the promise in it. I don't know when I started shrinking my needs down to almost nothing. It happened gradually, like erosion, a missed coffee here, a forgotten thank you there, until one day, asking for something small felt like asking for too much. That Starbucks afternoon didn't come out of nowhere. It was the natural result of years spent learning where I was allowed to exist. I didn't see it clearly then. I see it now. Later that night, after the house had settled into uneasy quiet, I went into my room and opened the desk drawer. I took out the notebook and flipped through its pages, the numbers staring back at me, patient and unarguable. I didn't know yet what I would do with it, but as I turned the page and felt the paper catch slightly at the spine, I realized something I hadn't allowed myself to consider before. I wasn't imagining any of it. The shift didn't announce itself. It never does. It began the way most harm does in families, quietly, wrapped in reason, disguised as preference. Kara didn't raise her voice. She didn't lash out. She adjusted things, moved pieces just enough that I was always slightly off balance, always the one recalculating. At dinner, she stopped setting a place for me unless Mark specifically mentioned I'd be home. If he forgot, she'd look up with a small, apologetic smile and say, "Oh, I didn't know you were joining us," even though my shoes were by the door and my coat was on the hook. When I started cooking earlier to avoid the awkwardness, she'd walk in, glance at the stove and say, "You don't have to do that, Lily's picky anyway." Then she'd order takeout for herself and Lily, leaving my food untouched, cooling on the counter until I wrapped it up and put it away. Sometimes she'd eat what I made, quietly without comment, then later tell Mark, "I think her cooking is a bit heavy for Lily, too old-fashioned." Mark would nod, distracted, already tired from the day. The house began to feel colder, even when the heat was on. I found myself wearing sweaters indoors, sleeves pulled over my hands. The light in the kitchen felt harsher than it used to, bright in a way that made you aware of crumbs, of flaws, of yourself. One afternoon, I came home from errands to find Lily in the living room, sprawled across the couch, with her feet on the coffee table. My mail was open beside her, envelopes torn cleanly at the edge. "Oh," she said when she saw me. "Mom said it was probably junk." I picked up one of the envelopes. It was from the bank, the same account I'd been dipping into quietly for Emily's expenses. My fingers tightened around the paper. Kara appeared in the doorway, arms crossed. "Relax," she said. "We didn't read anything important." She didn't apologize. She didn't ask. I stood there for a moment, my mouth dry, waiting for the familiar urge to smooth things over to kick in. It didn't. Instead, there was just a pause, a silence that stretched too long. Kara tilted her head. "Is there a problem?" "No," I said finally. My voice sounded thin to my own ears. "I just don't like my mail opened." She shrugged. "We're all family here." Family. The word landed like a door closing. That night, Mark mentioned the Starbucks incident again, his tone careful, like he was walking across glass. "I just don't want there to be tension." he said. Kara laughed softly. Then maybe people shouldn't make mountains out of molehills. She didn't look at me when she said it. The next morning, I found my notebook missing from the desk drawer. I stood there longer than I meant to, staring at the empty space where it had been, the wood lighter where the cover used to rest. My chest felt hollow, like something had been scooped out and left behind. I searched the room methodically, under the bed, in the closet, behind books, telling myself I'd moved it and forgotten. When I went into the kitchen, Kara was at the counter, scrolling on her phone. The notebook lay beside her, open. She looked up when she heard me. "Oh," she said casually. "I found this." My throat closed. "Why were you in my room?" She smiled, small and tight. "Lily was looking for a charger. You really shouldn't leave things lying around." "It wasn't lying around," I said. My voice shook despite my effort. It was in my drawer. Kara flipped a page with her finger. "You keep track of money?" she asked, eyebrows raised. "That's interesting." Mark walked in then, rubbing sleep from his eyes. He glanced at the notebook, then at me. "What's that?" Kara answered before I could. "She's been writing down expenses, like she's keeping score." "That's not—" I started, then stopped. The words tangled in my mouth. I reached for the notebook, but Kara slid it just out of reach. "Are you saying I'm using you?" she asked, her tone light but her eyes sharp. The room went quiet. Even the refrigerator seemed to hum louder, filling the space where breath should have been. Mark looked between us, his brow furrowed. "No one's saying that," he said slowly. Kara's smile widened just enough to feel dangerous. "It feels like that's exactly what's being said." I stood there, hands clenched at my sides, feeling the weight of years pressed down all at once. The ledger from my childhood flashed in my mind, my mother's careful handwriting, the discipline of survival. I opened my mouth, closed it, opened it again. "I just wanted to remember," I said finally. "That's all." "Remember what?" Kara asked. I couldn't answer. The silence swelled, heavy and suffocating. My ears rang. Kara pushed the notebook toward Mark. "This feels unhealthy," she said. "Don't you think?" Mark flipped through a few pages, his expression unreadable. He didn't say anything. He handed it back to Kara, not to me. "Let's not turn this into something bigger than it is," he said. Something in my chest collapsed quietly, like a shelf giving way. From then on, the rules shifted again. I stopped being included in plans unless Mark insisted. When I was present, conversations flowed around me, never quite touching. Kara's silences became sharper, more pointed. She'd pause before answering me, long enough to make me doubt the question was worth asking. She'd sigh when I entered a room, just softly enough to be deniable. At Lily's school event, Kara took the seat next to Mark, leaving me to stand at the back. When I moved closer, she glanced over and said, "Oh, those seats are reserved," though no one else seemed to be enforcing it. I stood there, heat creeping up my neck, watching Lily scan the crowd and wave enthusiastically at her mother. Her eyes slid past me without stopping. On the drive home, Kara mentioned how some people didn't know when to step back and let parents handle things. She said it like a general observation. Mark nodded, distracted by traffic. That night, I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, the house quiet except for distant laughter from the living room. My hands trembled when I tried to still them. I pressed them flat against the mattress, grounding myself in the texture of the fabric. I thought about leaving. The thought came suddenly, sharp and frightening. I pictured packing a bag, stepping out into the dark, reclaiming something unnamed. Then I thought of Emily, of how she'd looked at me lately, uncertain, watchful, like she was measuring how safe it was to care. The thought of abandoning her kept me still. The lowest point came on a Tuesday, unremarkable except for how quickly it unraveled. I came home early with a migraine, the kind that presses behind your eyes and makes light feel like a weapon. I went straight to my room, closed the door, and lay down without turning on the lamp. An hour later, Kara knocked once, then opened the door without waiting. "We're having dinner," she said. "I'm not feeling well," I murmured, eyes still closed. She stood there for a moment. I could feel her presence like pressure. Then she said, "You can't just opt out whenever you feel like it." "I have a migraine," I said. She laughed, short and sharp. Everyone has headaches. She turned on the overhead light. The pain exploded white hot. I gasped, a sound I couldn't stop, my hand flying to my face. My breath came in shallow bursts, unsteady. Kara watched me for a second, her expression unreadable. Then she turned the light back off. "Well," she said, already backing out of the room, "dinner will be ready for those who can manage." The door closed softly behind her. I lay there, heart pounding, tears leaking out despite myself. I didn't sob. I didn't move. I just lay there, staring into the dark, feeling smaller than I had in years. Later, I heard plates clatter, laughter, the normal sounds of a family eating together. No one came to check on me. When the house finally went quiet, I got up slowly and went into the bathroom. I looked at myself in the mirror, pale, eyes rimmed red, shoulders slumped. I barely recognized the woman looking back. I turned off the light and stood in the dark for a moment, my breath coming slow and shaky. Something had been taken from me piece by piece, not loudly, not all at once. And as I stood there, leaning against the sink, I realized with a clarity that frightened me more than the pain ever had. If I stayed silent much longer, there would be nothing left of me to protect. The moment that broke me wasn't loud. It didn't come with shouting or slammed doors or accusations sharp enough to leave marks. It came quietly, the way truth sometimes does, when there's no one left to perform for. It was 3 days after the migraine. The house was empty except for me. Mark had taken Kara and Lily out for dinner, something celebratory that hadn't been mentioned to me until they were already halfway out the door. I hadn't asked where they were going. I hadn't asked why. I'd learned the cost of those questions. The quiet felt unnatural, like the air was holding its breath. I was in the kitchen, rinsing a mug, when I heard the sound of the front door opening again, footsteps, slower this time, deliberate. Emily. She stepped inside carefully, shoulders slightly hunched, her backpack hanging loose from one strap. She froze when she saw me like she hadn't expected me to be there. "Oh," she said, "I thought you'd be in your room." "I was," I said. "I came down for some water." She nodded and set her backpack down, her movements hesitant. She didn't head to her room. She hovered by the counter, eyes fixed on the floor. For a few seconds, neither of us spoke. Then she said very quietly, "I heard them talking about you." My hands stilled in the sink. "About me?" I asked. She nodded again, her fingers twisted together, knuckles whitening. Kara said, "She said it's easier when you're not around, that things are lighter." Lighter. The word hit differently coming from Emily's mouth. It didn't feel like cruelty. It felt like damage already done. "She told Mark you make everything tense," Emily continued, voice barely above a whisper, "that you bring weight." I turned off the faucet. The sudden silence rang in my ears. "What did Mark say?" I asked. Emily hesitated. "He didn't really say anything. He just listened." Something inside me went still, not numb, clear. Emily swallowed. "She said you should probably move out, that it would be better for everyone." The room felt too sharp around the edges, like someone had turned the contrast up too high. I leaned back against the counter, my legs suddenly unsteady. "I'm sorry," Emily said quickly. "I shouldn't have told you. She stopped, eyes shining. "I didn't want you to think you were imagining it." I closed my eyes for a second, just one. When I opened them again, the world felt different, not softer, more exact. "Thank you," I said. She looked at me then, really looked, like she was searching my face for something she'd been afraid to name. "Are you going to leave?" she asked. The question wasn't accusing, it was terrified. I took a breath. It went in cleanly, no shaking, no resistance. I don't know yet, I said honestly, but I'm not going to disappear. Her shoulders loosened just a fraction. I don't want to be like her, Emily said suddenly. Like Kara, I don't want to learn that it's okay to treat people like that. The words settled into me, heavy and grounding at the same time. You won't, I said. Not if you see it clearly. She nodded, wiping at her eyes with the heel of her hand. I just don't know what to do. For the first time in a long while, I didn't rush to reassure her. I didn't tell her everything would be fine. We'll figure it out, I said instead. She hugged me then, quickly, awkwardly, like she wasn't sure she was allowed. Her arms were thin, tense. I held her carefully, feeling the fragile certainty of that moment lodge somewhere deep in my chest. After she went to her room, I stayed in the kitchen alone. I didn't cry. I didn't pace. I opened the drawer and took out the notebook. The pages were slightly bent where Kara had handled them. I smoothed them flat, one by one, my movements slow and deliberate. I didn't reread everything. I didn't need to. I saw the pattern clearly now. This wasn't about a drink, or a migraine, or a notebook. It was about erasure. Kara didn't want conflict. She wanted absence. She wanted a version of the household that functioned smoothly because anyone who disrupted her authority had been quietly removed. And Mark, kind, tired, avoidant Mark, had been letting it happen because confrontation felt harder than loss. The realization didn't make me angry right away. It made me calm. I closed the notebook and set it on the table instead of hiding it. I sat down and placed my hands on either side of it, palms flat, feeling the cool surface beneath my skin. I thought about my mother's ledger, about the way she tracked survival not to punish, but to understand, to know where she stood. I understood now. The sound of the front door opening pulled me out of my thoughts. Laughter drifted in, followed by Kara's voice, bright and animated, Mark's quieter tone, the rustle of coats. I stayed where I was. They came into the kitchen and stopped short when they saw me sitting there, the notebook visible between my hands. Kara's smile faltered for half a second before she smoothed it back into place. "You're up," she said. "Yes," I replied. Mark looked at the notebook, then at me. "Everything okay?" I met his eyes. I didn't look away. "We need to talk," I said. Kara laughed lightly. "Does it have to be now? It's late." "Yes," I said again. My voice didn't waver. "It does." The air shifted, not dramatically, subtly, like pressure equalizing. Mark hesitated, then nodded. "Okay." Kara exhaled, arms crossing. "About what?" I didn't answer right away. I stood, picked up the notebook, and held it against my chest. It felt solid, real. "About what's been happening in this house," I said, "and what I'm no longer willing to accept." For the first time, Kara didn't have a ready response. She just stared at me, assessing, her expression tight and unreadable. And as I stood there, spine straight, heart steady, I realized something that changed everything. She had expected me to stay quiet, and I was done proving her right. I didn't raise my voice after that night. I didn't threaten. I didn't accuse. I didn't demand apologies that would never come honestly anyway. I did something far more unsettling to Kara. I began to observe. The house shifted into a strange calm, like a lake after a stone has sunk, but before the ripples fully disappear. Kara became careful, polite even. Her words smoothed out, her smiles sharpened into something performative. She stopped barging into my room. She stopped touching my things. But the silences grew longer. I started keeping my notebook with me instead of hiding it. Not conspicuously, just present. On the corner of the desk, in my bag, sometimes on the kitchen table when I paid bills. I didn't write in it constantly. I didn't need to. The weight of it was enough. Mark noticed. He didn't comment, but I saw the way his eyes followed it sometimes, the way his posture shifted when Kara entered a room and spotted it. Kara never asked about it again. Instead, she began rewriting the story around me. She told Mark I seemed withdrawn. She mentioned casually that I might be depressed. She suggested once during breakfast that maybe I was overwhelmed and needed a fresh start somewhere else. I didn't respond. I focused on small, concrete things, receipts, statements, patterns. The bank alert from that afternoon stayed in my mind, unresolved. One charge didn't mean much on its own, but patterns did. I logged into my account late one night while the house slept. The glow of the laptop screen felt cold in the dark room, illuminating the lines in my hands as I typed. I pulled up months of statements and scrolled slowly, methodically. There it was. Not large amounts, not enough to trigger panic, just enough to slip by unnoticed if you weren't looking closely. Grocery runs charged to my card when Kara had gone, just to grab a few things. Online orders I didn't recognize. A streaming subscription I'd never signed up for. The dates lined up with days Kara had borrowed my laptop, or asked to use my phone when hers died, or told Lily to check something real quick on my tablet. My breath stayed steady as I copied the charges into the notebook. Dates, amounts, merchants. This wasn't forgetfulness. This was entitlement. I didn't confront her. Not yet. I started asking quiet questions instead. When a package arrived with Lily's name on it charged to my account, I asked Mark, calmly, if he'd authorized it. He frowned, confused, and said no. I let the moment hang, then nodded and said, maybe it was a mistake. When Kara mentioned an upcoming expense for Lily's school, I asked evenly how they planned to handle it. Mark said he'd take care of it. Kara's mouth tightened for just a second before she smiled and said, "Of course." I began documenting those moments too. Not the words, those could be denied, but the reactions, the pauses, the glances, the shifts in tone. Emily noticed before anyone else did. "You're different," she said one afternoon as we folded laundry together. Her voice wasn't accusing. It was curious. "How?" I asked. "You're quieter," she said, but not sad quiet, more like watching. I smiled faintly. "Is that a bad thing?" She shook her head. "No, it makes her nervous." She didn't have to say who. Emily began leaving small things in my room without comment. A copy of the household calendar she'd photographed on her phone. A screenshot of a group chat where Kara mentioned expenses Mark hadn't known about. A receipt Lily had crumpled and thrown away that Emily had fished out of the trash. We didn't discuss it openly. We didn't need to. There was a moment, brief, almost invisible, when I realized Emily had become an ally without being asked. Not because I'd recruited her, but because she had started to see clearly too. One evening, Kara announced she'd be handling the household finances to simplify things. She said it lightly, as if it were a favor. Mark hesitated. "We already have a system." Kara waved a hand. "It's outdated, and honestly, it might be easier if your sister didn't have to worry about money anymore." The words were framed as kindness. I looked up from my plate. "I'm comfortable managing my own finances," I said. Kara's smile didn't reach her eyes. "I just meant, it might take some pressure off you." "I'm not under pressure," I replied. The silence that followed was sharp. Kara's fork paused midair. Mark cleared his throat. "That's settled then," he said quickly. Kara didn't argue. She didn't need to. Later that night, I found my email password had been changed. I stood at the desk, staring at the screen, the message blinking back at me. Invalid credentials. I didn't panic. I reset it. Updated every security setting. Logged out all devices. Then I checked the activity log. Multiple login attempts. Different devices. Different times. The clarity that settled over me then wasn't emotional. It was procedural. I printed everything. Emails, statements, logs, screenshots Emily had sent me, copies of receipts. I organized them by date, clipped neatly together, and slid them into a folder. I didn't hide the folder. I placed it on the bottom shelf of my bookcase, between a dictionary and an old photo album. Visible if you knew where to look. Invisible if you didn't. The atmosphere in the house thickened. Kara became hyper-aware of my presence. She stopped making jokes when I entered a room. Her silences sharpened, her glances longer. She began asking Mark pointed questions when she thought I couldn't hear. "Do you think she's planning something?" Mark dismissed it. "You're overthinking." But I could hear the doubt creeping in. One afternoon, Mark asked me if I'd be willing to sit down and clear the air. I agreed. We sat at the kitchen table, the same one my mother's ledger used to live on in my memory. The light overhead was harsh, unkind. Kara positioned herself beside Mark, close enough to signal unity. "I feel like things have been tense," Mark said carefully. Kara nodded. "I don't want conflict. I just want transparency." I folded my hands on the table. "So do I." Her eyes flicked to my bookcase, then back to my face. "There's been a lot of documentation," she said lightly. "It feels like mistrust." I held her gaze. "Trust relies on boundaries." Mark shifted. "Is there something specific you're worried about?" "Yes," I said. The word landed heavier than I expected. Kara's posture stiffened. "Like what?" I didn't answer. Not yet. I stood, walked to the bookcase, and rested my hand on the folder without taking it out. "I'm preparing," I said. "For what?" Mark asked. "For whatever comes next," I replied. Kara laughed, sharp and brittle. "That sounds dramatic." I turned to face her fully. "It's practical." Her smile faded. That night, as I lay in bed, I replayed everything slowly, not emotionally, strategically. I thought about timing, about leverage, about how long this could go on if left unchallenged. I thought about Emily, asleep down the hall, learning what power looked like in real time. And I knew something else with certainty. Kara would not stop on her own. She would escalate, quietly, indirectly, the way she always had. The only question was when. The answer came the next morning in the form of a message notification lighting up my phone before dawn, an automated alert that made my stomach drop even before I read it. My name, a formal subject line, and the words "Request for account access" stamped with Kara's email address beneath it. The kitchen was already full when I walked in. Mark sat at the head of the table, shoulders hunched, coffee untouched in front of him. Kara was beside him, posture straight, arms folded loosely like she was prepared to be patient for as long as necessary. Emily stood near the doorway, hovering, unsure whether she was allowed to stay. Lily wasn't there. Kara had sent her to school early. The overhead light was unforgiving, bright enough to flatten every face and expose every hesitation. "Sit," Mark said when he saw me. I did. No one spoke for a moment. The silence pressed in, heavy and deliberate, the kind that dares someone to break it first. Kara smiled. It was practiced. "As you wanted to talk." "Yes," I said. Mark glanced between us. "Kara told me you've been acting guarded, that there might be some misunderstandings." "Misunderstandings don't change passwords," I said calmly. The smile on Kara's face flickered. "Just once." Mark frowned. "What does that mean?" I reached into my bag and placed my phone on the table, face down, then slid the folder out and set it beside it. I didn't open it yet. I let it exist. Kara's eyes dropped to the folder and stayed there a second too long. "I received a request for access to my financial accounts this morning," I said. "It came from your email, Kara." Her laugh came quickly. "That's ridiculous." "I reset my password last night," I continued. "Someone tried to get back in before sunrise." Mark straightened. "Kara?" She turned to him, incredulous. "Why would I do that?" I opened the folder. The sound of the metal clip releasing was small, but it cut cleanly through the room. I slid the first page across the table toward Mark. He picked it up, eyes scanning, then pausing. "What is this?" he asked. "A timeline," I said. "Charges made to my account, dates, vendors, devices used to log in." Kara leaned forward. "This is obsessive." Mark didn't look up. "These are groceries," he said slowly. Streaming services, clothing sites. I turned another page. Cross-referenced with delivery confirmations, addresses. Mark's jaw tightened. He looked at Kara. She scoffed. So now I'm a criminal because I ordered groceries. I didn't accuse you, I said. I documented. Emily took a step forward. Her voice was small but steady. Mom, those packages came here. I signed for 2 of them. Kara snapped her head around. Emily, stay out of this. Mark held up a hand. No, let her speak. Emily swallowed. She told me not to tell anyone. She said it was easier that way. The room went very still. Kara's face flushed. You're twisting things, she said, her voice rising. I borrowed her card once. She said it was fine. I didn't, I said. Mark looked at me. Did you? No. I slid another page forward. There were 17 transactions. Mark's breath left him in a slow exhale. 17. They were small, Kara said quickly. It's not like I emptied her account. That's not the point, Mark said. Kara stood abruptly. This is exactly what I was talking about. This atmosphere, this paranoia. I didn't raise my voice. You asked for transparency. She laughed again, sharper this time. You've been planning this. I've been protecting myself, I replied. Mark rubbed his temples. Why didn't you tell me? I met his eyes. Because every time I tried, I was told not to make things bigger than they were. Emily spoke again, softer now. She told Lily it was okay because Auntie never notices. Kara spun toward her. That is not true. Emily flinched but didn't back down. You said she keeps track of everything but never does anything about it. The words hung there, undeniable. Mark looked at Kara like he was seeing her for the first time. Is that true? Kara opened her mouth, closed it, then crossed her arms. Even if it is, she let it happen. I felt the room freeze. That, I said quietly, is exactly the problem. I stood then, slowly, deliberately. My knees didn't shake. My hands stayed steady. I didn't consent to being used, I continued. I didn't agree to be erased, and I didn't imagine any of it. Kara's voice dropped, dangerous now. You're doing this in front of my daughter. She deserves to see the truth, I said. So does yours. Mark pushed his chair back and stood as well. Kara, he said, his voice tight. Why did you try to access her account? She looked at him, then at the folder, then at Emily. Something in her expression hardened. I needed to know what she was hiding, she said. She was acting strange. So you broke into her email? Mark asked. I wouldn't call it breaking in. What would you call it? He pressed. Kara didn't answer. Mark picked up another page from the folder, his face drained of color as he read. These are screenshots, he said. Logan attempts, from your phone. Kara's eyes widened. You invaded my privacy? I secured my own, I said. The room felt charged now, electric. The overhead light buzzed faintly, too loud in the silence that followed. Mark set the papers down carefully. I need time, he said. No, Kara snapped. You need to stop her. I turned to him. I'm not asking you to choose. I'm setting boundaries. Kara laughed, brittle and sharp. You think you have power here? I held her gaze. I know I do. Emily stepped closer to me without looking back. Mark's voice broke slightly. Kara, I trusted you. Her face shifted then, not anger, not fear, but something colder. Calculation. You wouldn't survive without me, she said to him. You know that. The words froze the room. I didn't look at Mark. I looked at Kara. You don't get to decide who survives. She stared at me, chest rising and falling. For the first time since I'd known her, she looked uncertain. Mark spoke again, quieter now. We're going to talk to the bank, together. Kara's head snapped toward him. You can't be serious. I am, he said, and a lawyer. The silence that followed was absolute. Kara's mouth opened, then closed. She looked at Emily, who didn't move. She looked at me, and whatever she saw there made her step back. I gathered the folder and slid it back into my bag. "I'll be staying with a friend tonight," I said. "This isn't a negotiation." Kara's voice was thin. "You're tearing this family apart." I paused at the doorway. "No," I said. I stopped pretending it wasn't already broken. As I reached for my coat, my phone vibrated in my hand, one final alert lighting the screen with a confirmation I hadn't been expecting yet, but had prepared for all the same. The house felt different when I came back for my things, quieter but not peaceful, like a room after an argument where the air hasn't settled yet. Mark had insisted on being there. Kara wasn't home, Emily was at school, Lily, I later learned, was staying with a friend. We moved through the rooms slowly, collecting what was mine: clothes, books, small objects I hadn't realized carried weight until I touched them. Mark tried to speak a few times, then stopped himself. His silence wasn't weaponized now. It was heavy with regret. "I should have seen it," he said finally, standing in the doorway as I folded a sweater. "I didn't want to." "I know," I said. That was all. It was enough. The bank froze the accounts that afternoon. The lawyer confirmed what I already understood. The damage had been contained early. No catastrophic loss, no courtroom spectacle, just consequences, quiet and exact. Kara left the house within the week, not dramatically. No shouting, no slammed doors. She packed while Mark was at work and left a note that said she needed space and that this had all been taken out of proportion. Lily went with her. Emily stayed. That part mattered. Emily moved through the days carefully at first, like she wasn't sure what version of the house she was allowed to inhabit now. I stayed nearby, not under the same roof, but close enough to be present without intruding. We texted. We met for walks. Sometimes we sat together in silence and let that be enough. One evening, she handed me something folded and worn. "I found this in my room," she said, "from before." It was an old receipt, one I'd paid years ago, shoes for her first school dance. I remembered the night clearly, how she'd spun in front of the mirror, how nervous she'd been, how proud. "I kept it," she said quietly. "I don't know why." I did. We didn't talk about Kara much after that. We didn't need to. Her absence spoke for itself. The way the house exhaled, the way Emily laughed more easily, the way Mark stopped apologizing mid-sentence and started listening instead. As for me, I returned to my smaller place with a different posture. I didn't rush to fill silence anymore. I didn't volunteer explanations. I let people sit with their discomfort if it belonged to them. The notebook stayed with me, but it changed. The pages stopped filling with numbers and dates. Instead, I used the back pages for small things: appointments, reminders, notes to myself, ordinary life reclaimed. One morning, I took it out and realized I hadn't needed it in weeks. That surprised me more than anything. I started buying myself coffee again, not every day, just when I wanted to. The first time, I stood at the counter longer than necessary, feeling the familiar hesitation rise. Then I ordered anyway. I held the warm cup in my hands and let myself enjoy it without justifying why. It tasted like more than caffeine. It tasted like permission. Mark and I are different now, not closer in the old way, but clearer. He doesn't ask me to smooth things over. I don't offer to disappear for the sake of comfort. We meet where we are, not where we wish we'd been. And Emily, she's learning slowly what boundaries look like when they're lived instead of explained. That's the part that matters most to me. Sometimes I think about my mother's ledger, how she wrote everything down not because she was bitter, but because she wanted truth to have a place to land. I used to see it as evidence of scarcity. Now I see it differently. It was proof she trusted herself enough to look at reality straight on. The notebook on my desk feels lighter now, not because it holds less, but because I don't need it to defend my worth anymore. It's just paper. I'm the one who changed. If you stayed with me through this, thank you. There was a time when keeping track meant bracing for loss. Now it reminds me, I noticed, I remembered, and I chose myself anyway. If any part of my story echoed something you've lived, you don't have to explain it here. But you're not wrong for seeing what you see.